In 2013, a public trial was held in Jintang County, Chengdu City, Sichuan Province. The courtroom was packed, with many people traveling long distances just to witness the man known as a demon. Join us in this video to uncover what brutal act he committed that stirred such overwhelming public outrage. Hello and welcome to my channel. On the morning of June 21, 2013, the Criminal Investigation Office of Jintang County, Chengdu City, Sichuan Province, received a call from a resident of Putin Village, Waning Town. The caller reported a serious incident in the village. Two people had just lost their lives. Upon receiving the report, a team of investigators and forensic experts immediately rushed to the scene. The victims were identified as Mr. Liam Lee and his wife, Mrs. Grace Sun. Both were over 70 years old. They lived in a traditional rural home with 3 connected rooms in the classic Sanhayuan courtyard style, commonly found in the countryside. Once the area was secured, the authorities began examining the bodies. The couple were found lying on their backs in the left side bedroom. Mr. Lee was wearing a thin t-shirt and cotton pants, while Mrs. Sun had on a linen outfit. Based on their clothing and body positions, police initially suspected they had been attacked while sleeping. Their pillows and bedding showed little to no disturbance, and nothing in the room appeared to be out of place. This led to the theory that the assault was sudden and that Mr. Lee may not have had a chance to resist. A preliminary forensic assessment revealed deep wounds in the chest and abdominal areas of both victims. The shapes of the wounds suggested that they were inflicted with a similarly sized knife. Most of the stabs struck vital areas, and some even penetrated internal organs, causing severe trauma and rapid blood loss. Signs of rigor mortis had fully developed and spread throughout their bodies. Bruising was visible on the back and calves areas that would be lower when lying on one's back. After considering the environmental conditions and the body's state, forensic doctors concluded that both victims died at almost the same time. Their estimated time of death was about 9 to 10 hours before the bodies were examined, meaning the attack likely occurred around midnight on June 20th. Inside the bedroom, some clothes were scattered on the floor instead of hanging up. During their inspection, police noticed that one of the wooden wardrobe doors in the corner was slightly ajar. At the scene, no clear murder weapon was found, although there were signs of disturbance in the bedroom. The valuables inside, including a bundle of cash totaling about 2,000 yuan, roughly 7 million VND, were untouched. Additionally, Mrs. Sun's mobile phone and her 18,000 gold earrings were still on her body. According to authorities, in typical theft cases, perpetrators only resort to violence if absolutely necessary. In other words, killing usually occurs only if the intruders are caught in the act. If Mr. and Mrs. Lee had discovered a break-in, they would likely have resisted, perhaps by getting up or trying to escape. But in this case, both were found lying motionless, showing no signs of struggle. This detail, along with the fact that nothing valuable was taken, led investigators to believe that this was not a robbery. The attacker's true target appeared to be the elderly couple themselves. Given the deep wounds aimed precisely at vital areas, the police concluded that the killer had a clear intention to end their lives. For the investigation team under the Jintang County Police Office, this was the first time they encountered such a severe homicide. Both victims were over 70 years old. At the crime scene, task force members raised the possibility that the killer may have held a deep personal grudge against the victims. Technicians conducted a thorough forensic sweep of the bedroom, focusing on contact points. However, no suspicious fingerprints were found. Still, on the floor, officers discovered a near-complete footprint. Apart from that, no other clear clues were left behind. Mr. and Mrs. Lee's house had 3 rooms surrounded by walls. The bedroom door, where the bodies were discovered, showed signs of forced entry from the outside, suggesting the killer had picked the lock to break in. To the left was the couple's bedroom. The central room, used for family gatherings, featured an ancestral altar. On the right side was a room belonging to their son, Kevin Lee. The left and right sections of the house were separated by a wide courtyard. After the bodies were transferred to the forensic lab for detailed autopsy, police began investigating the background of the victims. They learned that Mr. Lee and Mrs. Sun had 4 sons: Kevin Lee, Peter Lee, Brian Lee, and George Lee. The eldest son, Peter, lived with his wife's family in the same village. The second youngest son, George Lee, had settled in town, while Brian Lee was working in the city. Peter Lee occasionally visited his parents, but since Brian and George lived farther away, they rarely saw them. The person closest to Mr. Liam Lee and Mrs. Grace Sun at the time was their adopted son, Kevin Lee. Kevin told police that he worked as a manual laborer in the local area. He would take on any job within his ability. Around 5 to 10 minutes past dawn that day, he was awakened by the sound of a phone ringing. It was a long call from Chen Banji, a fellow villager. The day before, Kevin had agreed to help Mr. Chen deliver vegetables to stalls in town. However, he forgot to set an alarm and overslept. Chen's call finally woke him up, realizing he was running late. Kevin didn't even take time to freshen up. He quickly jumped on his bicycle and rode straight to Mr. Chen's place to begin work. It was still early and not fully light outside. In his rush, Kevin didn't check on the room where his adoptive parents were staying. Around mid-morning, Kevin received a phone call from a neighbor named Liu Gaifai, who told him something had happened to his parents. He immediately rushed home. Mrs. Liu was actually the first to discover the tragedy and had alerted the authorities. She explained that the day before, Mrs. Sun had promised to go to the market early in the morning with her, but after waiting a long time without seeing her, Mrs. Liu decided to go check in person. She called out several times, but received no reply. Seeing that the main door was only half closed, she pushed it open and went inside only to find that Mr. Lee and Mrs. Sun had passed away. While taking statements from relatives and neighbors, police learned that 3 days earlier, Mr. Lee had gotten into an argument with a young man in the village named Jack Zhang. The conflict started when Jack, who was drunk, walked too quickly through a large puddle of mud. Mr. Lee happened to be walking past and got splashed, soaking the new clothes he had prepared to wear to a celebration. Jack refused to stop and apologize, so Mr. Lee went to confront his family that afternoon. In response, Jack threatened to beat Mr. Lee and used offensive language, even making harsh remarks that sounded like threats against his family's honor. Jack Zhang had a bad reputation in the village. He had been expelled from school for fighting and injuring others. He lived less than 100 meters from the Lee household. After receiving this information, police went to Jack's home to investigate further. There, they learned that Jack worked as a truck assistant for a man in the village. The previous morning, Jack had left for Kunming with that man and had not yet returned. Because he wasn't in the area at the time, police concluded that Jack had no opportunity to commit the crime. During this broader investigation, police discovered that Kevin Lee, who lived with Mr. Lee and Mrs. Sun, was not their biological son. He had been adopted by the couple when he was young. Kevin Lee was also known to argue frequently with Mr. Lee and Mrs. Sun. Although he often showed affection and concern for his adoptive parents, he had a tendency to become short-tempered when drinking. On one occasion, after getting drunk, his parents tried to talk to him and Kevin lost control. He shouted so loudly that neighbors thought something serious had happened and rushed over to check. This incident quickly caught the attention of police, who contacted Mr. Chen Banji, Kevin's employer, to gather more details. Mr. Chen confirmed that, although Kevin had agreed to work that morning, he didn't show up on time, prompting Mr. Chen to call him. Mr. Chen recalled that once Kevin finally arrived and sat next to him in the truck, he kept yawning and smelled strongly of alcohol. He appeared extremely tired and mentally drained. Further investigation revealed that Kevin had attended the wedding of a fellow villager named Kang Suo the night before. He drank heavily during the celebration and only left around 9:30 p.m. Neighbors also told police that Kevin had once gotten into a fierce argument with his adoptive parents after drinking. Since he lived under the same roof with the victims, had been drinking the night before, and showed signs of exhaustion the next morning, Kevin became the primary focus of police suspicion. Investigators confronted Kevin again. When questioned, he appeared nervous, repeatedly wiping his sweaty palms on his pants. His behavior raised more red flags. Kevin claimed that he had walked home drunk the previous night and, upon arriving, had gone straight to bed. He said he slept through the night without hearing anything unusual and had no idea what happened. In the room across from his explanation seemed vague and unconvincing, and police were unable to verify its accuracy at that time. Earlier, during the crime scene investigation in Mr. Lee and Mrs. Sun's bedroom, forensic technicians had discovered a near-complete footprint on the floor. By analyzing the tread pattern left at the scene, experts concluded that the shoe was likely a pair of men's athletic sneakers. Based on the length and width of the print, the person wearing them would have had a well-proportioned body and stood between 1.7 to 1.8 meters tall. Kevin's height was approximately 1.75 meters. This match further deepened police suspicion. They immediately searched the right-side room, Kevin's private living area. During the search, they found a relatively new pair of men's athletic shoes. Notably, when police compared the evidence, they found that both the size and tread pattern of Kevin Lee's shoes were an almost perfect match, with the print found on the bedroom floor of the victims. Inside the suspicious pair of shoes, police also found a fabric wallet tucked into a rain boot in the left corner under the eaves. The wallet contained some cash to 100 yuan and about 700,000 VND. What stood out most was that the wallet was stained with dried blood. Forensic technicians immediately sent the wallet for DNA analysis. The results came back quickly, confirming that both victims' DNA was present on the wallet. This, along with the matching shoe print, made Kevin Lee the prime suspect. Authorities decided to take him into custody for further interrogation. At the station, Kevin appeared even more anxious and shaky. Eventually, he admitted to killing his adoptive parents. Kevin explained that when he returned home drunk that night, the light in the left bedroom was still on. As soon as he entered, Mrs. Sun shouted at him. She scolded him for not listening. Before Kevin went out, she had told him not to drink too much and to come home early because they needed to sleep. She complained that he always made them wait up to open the gate. Drunk and irritated by her nagging, Kevin snapped and shouted back, telling her to stop interfering in his life. He said he could go wherever he wanted and do whatever he pleased. Hearing Kevin yell at his mother, Mr. Lee came out and threw a broom at him. In that heated moment, Kevin yelled back at both parents. Mr. Lee expressed regret for adopting him, saying they had treated him like a real son, but were repaid with ungratefulness. The argument escalated. Mr. Lee declared he would cut ties with Kevin and ordered him to leave the house immediately. Instead of leaving, Kevin stormed off to his room, slammed the door, and lay on the bed. Lying there, he replayed their harsh words in his mind. He felt increasingly angry and wronged. For years, Kevin had worked hard to support their daily expenses, only to be treated like this over a late-night drink. He couldn't believe his adoptive parents would say such cruel things and disown him over something so trivial. He held onto the grudge, unable to sleep, fueled by alcohol and resentment. Dark thoughts began to swirl in his mind. Sometime after 11 p.m., Kevin picked up a fruit knife and walked toward the left side bedroom where his adoptive parents were sleeping. Kevin Lee broke open the door and snuck into the room. On the bed, he saw both Mr. Lee and Mrs. Sun sound asleep. Without hesitation, he moved closer and used the knife to swiftly attack both of them. Kevin then took the fabric wallet and placed it beside the bed. He deliberately created a mess in the room to make it look like a burglary had occurred. He tucked the wallet into a rain boot, returned to his room, shut the door, and pretended as if nothing had happened. From the suspect's confession, police were finally able to piece together what had happened to the couple that night. To complete the chain of evidence needed to prosecute the case, officers asked Kevin to identify the location where he had disposed of the murder weapon. Kevin claimed he had thrown the knife into a well behind the house. However, after a thorough inspection of the well, no weapon was found. When police returned to question him, Kevin said he wasn't sure anymore if it wasn't in the well. Maybe it was somewhere else around the property. The authorities then expanded their search across the entire premises, but still could not locate the knife. This raised serious doubts among the investigators. Kevin had not left the house after the incident, so where had the weapon gone? His vague and inconsistent statements made some team members uneasy. During the next round of questioning, Kevin kept shaking his head, insisting he didn't know anything. He told officers that no matter what they asked, he couldn't answer because he wasn't actually the one who committed the crime. This sudden reversal shocked the investigators. Kevin now claimed that after returning from the wedding that night, there had been no argument at all with his adoptive parents. Instead, he said he simply went to bed and stayed there until he was woken up by Mr. Chen's early morning phone call. Kevin couldn't explain how his mother's wallet ended up inside the rain boot he often used for work, nor could he account for the matching shoe prints found in the bedroom. He explained that his palms tend to sweat a lot when he's nervous, so he has a habit of wiping them on his clothes. Kevin said he was extremely anxious and overwhelmed by being treated as the prime suspect. He admitted that he struggled to manage his emotions and didn't know how to respond to the intense questioning. Faced with strong evidence and harsh interrogation, someone like Kevin, who lacked eloquence and had difficulty defending himself, quickly crumbled. With no witnesses and unable to prove his innocence, he eventually confessed under pressure, but now he claimed that he had only said he was guilty because he panicked and made the story up. At this point, police were no longer fully convinced by his testimony. Police could not rule out the possibility that Kevin Lee had confessed in a moment of guilt and later changed his story out of fear of being convicted. After reviewing his case, the lead investigator ordered the team to re-examine every clue gathered up to that point. While analyzing the evidence, officers paid closer attention to the footprint at the scene. Kevin had previously stated that he lay in bed for a while before getting up around midnight to carry out the attack. However, the new athletic shoes were not the only footwear Kevin owned. Police began to question whether, during such an impulsive act, Kevin would really take the time to put on a bulky pair of sneakers. Why would he wear shoes at all when he could have just slipped into sandals or even gone barefoot? Another inconsistency that troubled investigators was Kevin's inability to identify where the weapon had been disposed of. If he truly were the killer, why not simply take all the money from the wallet and destroy it, rather than leave it in a rain boot placed in such a visible spot? The more they analyzed these contradictions, the more doubtful they became about the truthfulness of Kevin's earlier confession. At this point, police began to seriously consider the possibility that Kevin might have been wrongly accused and that the real killer was someone else. Kevin's sneakers had been left outside under the eaves. It was possible that the real culprit had worn them to stage the crime and frame him. When officers later interviewed people in the neighborhood, most of the neighbors expressed disbelief at the idea that Kevin could be the murderer. They knew him as someone with a bit of a temper, but never violent. In their eyes, even though Kevin was adopted, he had cared for Mr. Lee and Mrs. Sun far more than their biological sons. While neighbors and extended family supported Kevin, the opposite was true for the three Lee brothers, Peter, George, and Brian. They all told police they were suspicious of their adopted brother. This contrast in perspectives made investigators increasingly skeptical. Upon deeper inquiry, police learned that the three brothers had long avoided taking responsibility for their parents' care. They had pushed all the burden onto Kevin. When police resumed their interrogation, Kevin shared that in the past, his parents often argued with their three sons over various matters, big and small. However, recently, things had seemed to improve and become more peaceful. While speaking with police, Kevin recalled overhearing his parents discussing life insurance not long ago, though he had been in a hurry to leave. At the time, in the days that followed, Kevin Lee forgot about the life insurance conversation and never asked his parents for more details. This piece of information quickly caught the attention of the police. At this point, they began to focus on the three biological sons of Mr. Lee and Mrs. Sun. Since each had existing tensions with the victims, the investigation team decided to look into the whereabouts of Peter Lee, George Lee, and Brian Lee on the night of June 20th, the time the incident occurred. George was in town, while Brian was working in the city. Only the eldest son, Peter, was still living near the village. Officers went to the nearby village where Peter's wife, Lily Liu, resided to gather more information. Lily told them that on June 19th and 20th, she and her daughter were away visiting her older sister in the city, so she had no idea what had happened in the village or where her husband was during that time. However, during this investigation, a neighbor named Mr. Suo, who lived next door to Peter, told police that on the afternoon of June 20th, he saw Brian Lee, Peter's younger brother, walking into Peter's house. Police repeatedly questioned Mr. Suo, who firmly insisted that he clearly saw Brian's face and couldn't have mistaken him for someone else. This was concerning, as Brian had previously claimed to have been in the city on that date. If Mr. Suo was correct, Brian had lied in his initial statement. Further probing into Lily Liu's account revealed that her trip to visit her sister hadn't been planned. She explained that her husband Peter had suddenly handed her a large amount of cash and encouraged her to take their daughter on a trip. The fact that Peter urged his wife to leave on the exact day of the crime raised further suspicion. Police theorized that if Peter and Brian were indeed the killers, then the murder had been carefully planned in advance. Peter might have chosen the day of the attack, arranged for his wife to be away, and called Brian to come over that same day. Their adopted brother Kevin was attending his close friend's wedding. While police continued to dig into Peter and Brian, they received new information from Kevin. He said that when his friend Ken Suo got married, Peter had also shown up at the house to offer congratulations even though he wasn't formally invited. This raised more suspicion. It meant Peter knew Kevin would be away at the wedding that day. After collecting multiple leads, police narrowed their focus on Peter and Brian. They decided to summon both for formal interrogation and simultaneously searched Peter's house and Brian's rented apartment in the city. During the search of Peter Lee's house, police found two life insurance policies with large payout values. The insured were Mr. Liam Lee and his wife, Mrs. Grace Sun. The purchaser was Peter, and the beneficiaries were the three brothers Peter, Brian, and George. Earlier interviews with relatives and neighbors had already revealed that the three biological sons had always tried to avoid taking care of their parents, constantly shifting the responsibility to one another. Now, the fact that they were all named beneficiaries only deepened police suspicion. At Brian Lee's rented apartment in the city, police found a train ticket receipt in his jacket pocket. One ticket showed a trip from the city to Jintang County at noon on June 20th. Another ticket showed a return from Jintang back to the city on the morning of June 21st. This unusual travel pattern directly contradicted Brian's earlier statement that he had been in the city the entire time. At the station, Brian insisted he had not left the city on June 20th and had not been in the area. Meanwhile, Peter argued that the police had no concrete evidence and couldn't accuse him based solely on the insurance policies, which he claimed were meant to protect his parents in case of emergencies. At this point, investigators identified Brian as the weakest link. They applied psychological pressure, confronting him with the inconsistencies in his testimony. Eventually, Brian's defensive mindset collapsed, and he confessed that the death of his parents had been orchestrated by all three brothers. Following Brian's confession, George Lee, the second brother, was immediately arrested. Under intense questioning, both Peter and George also confessed to their involvement. Now, let's hear what these three men had to say about their motives and how they carried out such a cold-blooded plan against their own parents. The Lee family had three biological sons. Mer and Mrs. Lee were both manual laborers, and the household had always struggled financially. In rural areas at that time, having sons was a source of pride for most families. But for the Lee family, having three sons became a burden. They strongly believed in an old superstition: three sons never bring wealth. After visiting a fortune teller, Mr. and Mrs. Lee were told they would face misfortune because of their three sons. Worried by the prophecy, they decided to break the curse by adopting another child. Unwilling to have more biological children, they adopted Kevin Lee. After getting married, Peter moved into his wife's home, living under her family's roof. George married a woman in town and chose to settle there for a better future. Brian dropped out of college and was working odd jobs in Chengdu. None of the three biological sons lived near their parents. They had essentially pushed all caregiving responsibilities onto Kevin, believing it was his duty to repay the adoptive parents. Because Mr. and Mrs. Lee always praised Kevin while criticizing their biological sons, Peter, George, and Brian grew increasingly hostile toward him. Despite working hard, Peter Lee still felt inferior to his peers, many of whom were not more educated than he was. After much soul-searching, Peter decided he needed a concrete plan to become wealthy. He dreamed of opening a hardware store, but faced serious financial obstacles. His wife's family was not well off either, so he had no choice but to turn to his own parents for help. After Peter explained his business idea, Mr. and Mrs. Lee didn't support it. They urged him to continue working and saving instead of diving into risky ventures. They also explained that they had no valuable assets to offer him. Even if Peter insisted on opening the store, they simply had nothing to give. Peter felt that his parents looked down on him and grew angry. Still, he refused to let go of his ambition. He pleaded with them to mortgage the family's garden plot and lend him some money, arguing that he had a rightful share in the land. But Mr. and Mrs. Lee flatly refused. They even told him that after they passed away, the house and land would go entirely to their adopted son, Kevin Lee, because he was the only one among the four sons who willingly cared for them. In old age and illness, whether those were just words spoken in anger or not, Peter took them to heart. He believed his parents didn't love their biological children and only cared about their adopted son. The second son, George Lee, worked at a steel factory in town. He and his wife had 3 young children to raise. To make matters worse, George's wife had recently been diagnosed with a serious illness. He was under enormous pressure to cover the family's rising expenses. In the past, he had gotten into a heated argument with his parents while defending his wife. As a result, the relationship between them had become increasingly distant. The third son, Brian Lee, was also a factory worker with just enough income to get by. During the recent Lunar New Year, Brian brought his girlfriend home to meet the family. But once Mr. and Mrs. Lee found out she worked at a nightclub and had tattoos, they firmly refused to accept her as their daughter-in-law. Each of the 3 biological sons had unresolved tensions with their parents. They became openly resentful whenever their parents praised Kevin Lee, sometimes even saying Kevin this and Kevin that. What bothered them most was hearing their parents declare that none of the family assets would be passed down to them. This filled them with bitterness. Recently, Brian had been chasing quick money and got involved in online gambling. He ended up with a significant amount of debt. Desperate, he turned to his brothers for help, but Peter and George were also unable to assist. Stuck in a hopeless situation, Brian began to mentally spiral under the pressure. While feeling lost and overwhelmed, Brian Lee suddenly received a call from Jason Zhang, an old college classmate. Jason was now working as a life insurance consultant. He tried to persuade Brian to purchase life insurance for his parents, suggesting it was a good way to show filial piety while also helping him meet his sales target. When Brian heard about the large potential payout, he began to develop sinister intentions. He thought carefully before approaching his older brothers with the idea of cashing in on their parents' lives. At first, Peter and George were shocked and scolded Brian for being heartless. They refused to participate. However, in early February, Peter visited their parents and overheard them discussing plans to sell their gold jewelry to help Kevin Lee buy a farm vehicle. That changed everything. Peter immediately reconsidered, and since George had always followed his older brother's lead, he eventually agreed as well. The 3 brothers pooled their money and purchased 2 high-value insurance policies for their parents through their former classmate Jason Zhang, naming all 3 of them as the beneficiaries. To avoid raising suspicion, the brothers started acting more attentive toward their parents. Mr. and Mrs. Lee believed their sons had finally changed and were genuinely happy. Once the insurance contracts were finalized, the 3 began planning the incident to trigger the payout. due to their deep resentment toward the adopted son. The plan also involved framing Kevin Lee killing two birds with one stone. On the morning of June 10, Peter visited his parents. While Kevin was home, a fellow villager named Ken Suo dropped by to invite him to his wedding, which would take place on the evening of June 20th. Kevin gladly accepted and promised Ken he wouldn't leave until they were both drunk. Since Ken and Kevin had been childhood friends, Peter knew Kevin would absolutely attend the wedding, and he would definitely drink. Seeing this as the perfect opportunity, Peter called his brothers and said this was their chance to act. George couldn't return due to his responsibilities caring for his sick wife and young children, so the mission was left to Peter and Brian. Around 11:30 p.m., on the night of June 20th, Peter and Brian arrived at their parents' home. The outer wall was low, so they climbed in easily. First, they approached the room where Kevin slept. Looking through the window, they saw Kevin lying on his bed clearly drunk. On the porch, Kevin's shoes were placed neatly. Brian deliberately took off his own shoes and put on Kevin's instead. Then the two broke into the central section of the house, where their parents were staying. Brian was in charge of entering, while Peter kept watch outside. Once inside, Brian quickly moved to the bedroom and, within moments, used a knife he had brought to fatally attack both of his parents. Seeing the wallet on the table, Brian Lee took it. On his way out, he deliberately messed up some objects to make it look like a robbery. He placed the fabric wallet into a pair of rain boots that Kevin Lee frequently used. Then, he carefully returned Kevin's sneakers, the ones he had worn during the crime, back to the porch. Throughout the entire process, Brian wore gloves to avoid leaving any fingerprints. Afterward, he and Peter called George to report that the job was done, and the two quietly left in the night. All three put on a convincing act of grief when they arrived at the scene and heard the news of their parents' brutal deaths. To further convince police that Kevin was the killer, they all gave statements that pointed suspicion toward him. Outwardly, they mourned, but inside, they were celebrating, believing that soon they would receive a large sum of insurance money, enough to solve all their financial problems. Following their confessions, the police expanded their investigation to understand more about the Lee family dynamic. Neighbors near the house revealed that Kevin had always been bullied by his older brothers, while Peter, Brian, and George were known for being arrogant and rebellious. Kevin was obedient and often helped their parents. He saw this as a way to repay them for raising him. Police asked Kevin if he knew about Mr. and Mrs. Lee selling gold jewelry to help him buy a farm vehicle. Kevin confirmed it was true, but clarified that not all of the gold came from his parents. Some of it was purchased with money he had given them during times when he was financially stable. According to Kevin, his parents promised they would save the gold for his future wedding. He admitted that although he deeply loved his adoptive parents, they still had occasional arguments. By then, Kevin was already in his 30s, but hadn't settled down. Instead of searching for love, he often spent his free time drinking with friends. Because of that, his parents would frequently scold him. Sometimes, Kevin lost his temper and argued back. These disputes were known to many neighbors. Peter, Brian, and George were charged with premeditated murder and insurance fraud. At the first trial, all three were sentenced to death due to the extreme severity of their crimes. George later appealed, claiming he did not directly participate in the attack. However, Peter and Brian remained silent. They accepted their punishment, admitting they deserved it. The appeal trial was held publicly and drew a large crowd of local residents. The court rejected George's appeal and upheld the original death sentence. It ruled that the actions of the three brothers were deeply immoral and had caused immense harm to both their family and society. Whispers began to spread the moment all three brothers were officially sentenced to death. Most people supported the court's decision, and many expressed outrage and condemnation toward the Lee brothers. Their act of planning to kill their own parents shocked the public and stirred intense discussion for a long time. While insurance fraud wasn't unheard of, the Lee case stood out as one of the most disturbing. Their methods were extremely deceitful and calculated. One remarkable aspect of this case was that the adopted son, Kevin Lee, was not wrongfully convicted. After everything, Kevin chose to remain in the house where he had grown up. Every day, he prepares offerings and incense to honor his adoptive parents. There's an old saying, blood is thicker than water. But this case challenged that belief. The 3 biological sons bound by blood were the very ones who held the knife, all for the sake of a life insurance payout. Meanwhile, the adopted son was the only one who shed genuine tears, and the only one still living with love and loyalty. Perhaps, family isn't always defined by blood but by the kindness someone chooses to carry in their heart. At the time of the crime, some relatives and neighbors mentioned an old folk belief: 3 sons never bring wealth. It was this superstition that led Mr. and Mrs. Lee to adopt another child. After this tragedy, many people found themselves more convinced by the saying. However, others argued that blind faith in such beliefs ultimately led the couple to their downfall. In their view, if Kevin had never entered the family, maybe things would have turned out differently. What about you? What do you think of the Lee brothers' actions and of the story behind this chilling case? Let us know in the comments below. And thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss our next investigation.